So when we're thinking about long run growth and technological progress and replacing workers with capital, the question obviously well, if jobs are getting destroyed, how many jobs are getting created? Are we actually destroying more jobs than we create, or are we creating more jobs than we destroy? Now, that number is actually somewhat difficult to find out. We can always look at the net employment gain, and that's what the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example, reports on every month. But it was only relatively recently that we started looking at how many jobs were lost and how many jobs were created. And so this has those numbers, job destruction is in red and job creation is in blue for a number of different countries for different time frames. And so you can see that for all countries except for the UK, uh, they created more jobs than they destroyed. The net creation, net employment change is positive for all of the countries except for the UK. And so then that really brings us to the question of, well, how do we create so many more jobs? What are those jobs? If we look at the US, we have data, good data going back to 2000. So there's a uh, data set called JOLTS, that's job openings and labor turnover survey. And it gives both job creation and destruction. One thing you note is that during expansions, job creation is higher than job destruction, but during recessions, right, those gray patches, right, we see the long recession in 2008 to 2009, job destruction is often much higher than job creation. And so often what seems to happen is that we're creating jobs, creating jobs, creating jobs, and then a recession happens and firms lay off a lot of workers and weak firms go out of business. So there was often an argument made by some economists during the Great Depression and sort of throughout the 20th century that recessions were sort of important in to purge some of those less productive jobs and less productive companies from the economy. There's some disagreement about that, so I don't know if that's a proven point. One economist named Beveridge looked at the sort of pro-cyclicality of job creation, right, where jobs are created in booms, expansions, and job destruction happens in recessions, and created the Beveridge curve. And so what he showed was that there's an inverse relationship between the unemployment rate and the job vacancy rate, where the job vacancy rate is just how many jobs are open that firms are looking to hire for, divided by how many jobs there are. And so if we look at the Beveridge curve, so this has the Beveridge curve for both the US and Germany, and we'll come back and look at some of the differences between these countries. But you can see, so starting in 2001, the US was at an unemployment rate of like 4.5% and had a vacancy rate of about 3.5%. And then as the sort of economy sort of went back and forth in that mild recession, sort of stayed on that Beveridge curve. And then as we hit the Great Recession and the unemployment rate got a lot higher, we ended up with an unemployment rate of around 10% and very low vacancies. And then as we recovered, it looked like the Beveridge curve had shifted. And so this was something that was a little unexpected and seems to be due mainly to long run unemployment. So people who were unemployed for a long time. Germany experienced, they have a somewhat flatter Beveridge curve, and so experienced a much worse recession starting in 2001. But then since then, their labor market has been so much stronger. And one thing to note is that their job vacancy rate for any given level of unemployment is lower, significantly lower than in the US. And so that's a question that, why is that? We're going to try to answer that in this chapter. So when we think about that Beveridge curve, we think about, okay, these are the unemployed workers. They are looking for work. And the job vacancy rate, those are firms that are looking for workers. We want to think about labor market matching, right? And so how do we match those unemployed workers with the job vacancies? And so there could be a lot of reasons that those matches don't happen automatically, right? So there could be mismatch in terms of the skills that the unemployed workers have and the jobs that firms are hiring for. And that could be particularly important during times of technological progress, right? Where we have workers that had been trained in the skills and technologies of the previous generation, and companies that are hiring for skills and technology in the current generation. It could be an information problem where unemployed workers don't know about the workers that are hiring. Another type of mismatch could just be geography. If I'm unemployed in Rhode Island, but there's a job that would be good for me in California, I might not know about it. I might not want to move to California. Policies and technology can improve efficiency. So, if you think about the internet and how much easier it is to find jobs not only in your local area, but around the country, even around the world, that can improve matching. But there can be industry specific shocks, right? That mean that, if the steel industry goes out of business in Pittsburgh, that means that there could be a whole lot of unemployed workers and not many firms hiring. And so that can create its own problems. So if we come back to this and look at the U.S. and German differences in their Beveridge curves, the Germany has a much lower vacancy rate than the U.S. And so that could be that Germany's sort of labor market matching efficiency is higher. They don't need to have as many vacancy rates for each unemployed worker, whereas the U.S. has more vacancy rates, and so it's harder to fill. I mean, that could be because the U.S. is a larger country. It could be because institutional setup is different. So German unions are stronger than U.S. unions, for example. We'll come back to that. And so we're going to want to start thinking about those institutions and what role they play in the economy.